Information Agency News of Ukraine, our TV project The World Has to Know. I'm very happy to welcome in our studio a member of the Australian Psychological Society, APS, Christopher Neesham. He is psychologist and executive director of the Neesham Consulting. Also, Christopher Neesham, as an Australian, is lucky owner of an ordinary Australian pet.
That's actually a wallaby. A wallaby is like a small kangaroo. Mm-hmm. My brother, my twin brother, found a joey, a small wallaby, inside the pouch, and he retrieved the joey, brought it home. We nursed the joey, and I'm not sure if you could describe it as a family pet, but it stayed with us for nearly a year. The idea was to have the joey, it was called Wobbly, to have Wobbly, re-assimilate with a mob of kangaroos in the area, which ultimately it did. So I can say that we did have a kangaroo or a wallaby, but that's not the typical experience of Australians. People think that if you come from Australia, you've got kangaroos in the backyard, you've got venomous snakes, you've got, poisonous spiders and so on. That it's hazardous, but it's not. It's more of it's not a myth. I mean, it exists. Those threats exist, but they've been greatly exaggerated.
But now life in Australia is less dangerous than in Ukraine.
The life in Australia is very stable. We have our challenges, but those challenges are incomparable to what you're experiencing in Ukraine. I have had the experience of being in other areas where there's been conflict. This is different. I mean, this is a full-scale invasion that you have here. But I really, it's unsettling, but I focus my attention on the job at hand. I have a job and I've come here for a specific purpose. You and I are involved in that program, coach training to build the leadership capability of middle managers in emergency services and also NGOs. So I focus very much on the task at hand.
Before yesterday, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
We have the rocket on the Obolon region in Kyiv, shedding. It was near you, maybe in 10 kilometers.
Yeah, it's close. I mean, the threat is real, and that's a reminder of how real the threat is.
Real.
For myself, in Kiev, that's one experience. But if I was in eastern Ukraine, that would be another experience. In Kiev, I feel safe. You have a very good air defense system. You do have the almost daily reminder of war with the alarms, and the alarms. For me, it's a reminder, of the very real threat of bombing or of missiles. But my experience is different from your experience. I mean, you're living this as a daily reality and have been living this for more than 2 years. That's a very different experience.
Christopher has worked not just in Australia, but in Europe.
This year alone, I've gone around the world. If the circumference of the world is 40,000 kilometers, 3 or 4 times. From London to Miami to Port of Spain in Trinidad.
Work in psychology has taken him off the beaten track. It's the quote. From the House of Lords to Transnistria, Kosovo, Ramallah and Lebanon to understand what trauma is and how to deal with it in times of adversity, especially in times of crisis and war. What we have to do with these issues, challenges, war trauma,
It's a question of, it depends on what level you're dealing with it. If you're dealing with it at an individual level, then you need to activate your own resources to manage that. What do I mean by your own resources? I mean being aware of the strengths that you have and how you can activate those strengths. It also means having the capacity to see the good and the bad. It's about having a purpose and understanding, where this fits within your life. There's also the importance of social support, and that means using your friends and family and others to share your experience and to discuss that. And that social support is absolutely critical.
I try to understand. That's why it is important to work in the sphere of leadership.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, leaders have a greater scope of influence, and they have authority. Which they can leverage when it comes to managing these things. So, you can have mayors, you can have CEOs, you can have people who are leading NGOs and so on, and down to the middle management level who can drive some of these initiatives. The leader has a responsibility, family members have a responsibility, friends have a responsibility. We talked about engaging and using that social network. In Ukraine, there are many challenges. There are challenges, the social challenges of families that are split in the sense that you have people are being mobilized, and then you have the combatants who are
and
fighting.
Too many refugees.
You have the refugees and how
Millions
to manage
abroad.
those refugees. You have the diaspora outside Ukraine. I think some 5 million. So there are some serious problems that need to be addressed. One of which is.
And now we can continue. We have the electricity, at least.
Yeah, we're talking about some of the challenges, and that's a very real reality, isn't it? The daily power cuts.
We had the interview with Giles Dooley. He is the United Nations ambassador for people with the disabilities. Yeah. And he told that if any community has just one person with a trauma, this community exactly has trauma.
It's a complex question. Yeah. I'll try to answer it simply. So in terms of the management of trauma, you can talk about proactive measures. That's what you do prior to people experiencing the trauma. And then you can talk about post-traumatic reaction and how you manage them. I think it's important to build the resilience of those people who are, let's say, for example, somebody is mobilized and they're going to the front line. It's a question of building their resilience prior to engaging in combat. And there are many programs that and high quality programs that you've been able to use locally. It's a hybrid, I think, of some of those programs. But you've got Battle Smart, Battle Mind, mental resilience training. So what that's doing is it's preparing the soldier for combat, so that after the experience, when they reintegrate within the community, that they're less likely to experience things like post-traumatic stress disorder. In terms of the assimilation of people who have been exposed to trauma back within the community, it's important that you don't have that stigma, that you're able to engage social resources, psychological resources, and personal resources, the individual's resources, in the management of that. Also, part of dealing with the trauma is going back into the community and resuming a normal life. And here, companies and leaders have a role to play as well, because they need to create opportunities for the veterans, so that they are able to engage in work. They're able to engage in activities that are far removed from the experience that they had on the front line.
Christopher has designed different programs for government departments and international organizations such as Red Cross, the Aspen Institute, the Law Institute of Victoria, the Australian Public Service and Transport Accident Commission, as well as other multinational clients in finance, logistics, telecommunications, pharmaceuticals and manufacturing sectors.
You mentioned in my introduction that I do a lot of work with large companies, multinationals, but also SMEs as well, small to medium enterprises. I think in those organizations, one of the things that we learn is that leaders have a role in not just the professional development, but the personal development of their people. So in Ukraine, organizations can take the lead here by activating their leaders. What I mean by activating their leaders is educating them about the effects of the mental health consequences of trauma or war, and having them understand the resources that they can use in order to deal with that trauma and to take away the stigma of mental illness, because quite often people see going to see a psychologist, for example, as something to be avoided, because it means I'll be classified as sick and labelled in an inappropriate way. That's not the case at all. Psychologists are there to help, psychologists, counsellors, and so on. And a leader has a role in activating those resources. Sometimes those resources can be within the organisation. So you can have employee assistance programs, for example. You can have in-house counsellors or people who are specially trained in human resources or people and culture. they can be activated as well. So it's a question of internal resources and external resources, but using those effectively and strategically to manage the trauma.
Kyiv School of Economics. Why? It's an open question.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I had the opportunity to meet the head of the Ukrainian Psychological Association, the president of the Ukrainian Psychological Association, Valeria Pali, who was introduced to me by a former psychiatrist who works with the Aspen Institute. She, of course, works at Kyiv School of Economics. She encouraged me to deliver a lecture when I was first here in December on leadership and what are some of the core competencies that leaders need. That then led to a program that I designed on coach training to mobilize, again, local resources. For me, it's really important to activate those resources. I'm only here, I'm in and out, whereas you're living that reality, you're familiar with that experience. To mobilize local resources where we'd have a cohort of coaches who are working with Ukrainians at the middle management level, and to build that leadership capability. Kyiv School of Economics was a very good platform for that, highly respected institution. So that's how I came to work at Kyiv School of Economics.
2 days of meetings, collaborations in the frame of Kyiv School of Economics with the students and other persons who were involved in this process, yeah?
Yeah, for me it's very important when I'm working that I create practical outcomes. It's one thing to deliver a lecture, which expands knowledge, but it's another to expand knowledge and also have that knowledge converted into practical skills. And what impressed me about that cohort was the enthusiasm and the motivation to do that. I think I mentioned that some feedback was that they tended to underestimate their skills and capability as coaches. What are the results, the outcomes of the workshop? I have to say I'm extremely impressed with the caliber of the participants who were in that workshop. Good personal understanding of themselves, good understanding of the realities here, but also people who had a disposition for coaching. The skills and the qualities, were there at a more basic level, but that's a very good foundation. And I say we because I was working with that team, that cohort of coaches, were able to build on that foundation. But they will now go on to coach middle managers, and I'm confident that we'll reach the target. We have a target of 250, a minimum of 250 people to be coached, middle managers, in the sectors that I described earlier. And if we achieve that target, I will be delighted. I'd like to expand on that over time, but we've got a good cohort who will drive that and achieve positive outcomes. The network that we've created, the great thing is that the participants come from they have different professional backgrounds. Some are working for NGOs, some are working for universities, and so on. They each bring their own network. So what that means is that we have a pool of coachees that we can target.
Who is coachee?
Oh yeah, that's good that you asked that question. So I make the distinction between potentially the three parties within the coaching relationship. You've got the coach, the coach who partners with the coachee. That's the person that they're working with face to face. So if you and I are coaching, it's me, the coach, you, the coachee. But we also have the client, and the client is the organization, the person who engages the coach to work with the coachee. So you mentioned some of the companies that I've worked with before. So Bayer, for example, would be the client, or Oracle would be the client, and I'd work with their some of their C-suite executives. So it could be the CFO or whoever. But that person, the CFO, is the coachee.
Psychologists really can make a miracle. They can make successful athletes from not successful.
In terms of psychologists being miracle workers, I would say that they're facilitators. That they can achieve great outcomes. But in terms of working miracles, I'm not sure that we're miracle workers. Sometimes we might flatter ourselves and consider ourselves to be miracle workers, but I don't think that's the case.
Sport is not emotion-free. Think of the emotions you experience when you're playing sport. You can experience joy, pride, fulfillment, disappointment, anger, and frustration. The question is, What do you do with those emotions?
The psychologist's role is to expand self-awareness. And by that I mean the awareness of the person with whom they're working, to see, their strengths, their weaknesses, their challenges, the resources that they have, what enables good health or performance or recovery, and the disablers that they have as well. So the self-awareness piece is important across those relationships, and that the psychologist is somebody who facilitates the achievement of the client's goals, but working interactively and building the relationship to make that possible.
And here is a problem for many athletes, is that they focus too much on just one single end goal.
For his part, Christopher Neesham, being an athlete himself, has completed solo marathon swims in South China Sea, Aegean Sea, Arabian Sea and Black Sea. Christopher has worked with elite athletes and national and Olympic coaches, particularly as the designer of an online high-performance program for coaches and athletes, elitefits.com.au. This program is regularly used by top athletes and teams, including those ranked in the world top 10. Yeah?
The question is, what next? So when you have an end goal, think, and you've achieved that end goal, plan and think of the next challenge that can excite and stimulate you and motivate you to extraordinary achievements.
I think for a psychologist, when they enter a relationship with their client, and I'll just loosely refer to anybody as being the client, they need to understand that they're working with the client and that it's a partnership, it's a relationship. In the case of the psychologist, if you look at coaching, for example, it's about partnering with your client or / coachee, I'll use those words interchangeably, in order to realize their potential. So what you don't want to do as a psychologist is to disempower the person with whom you're working. And one of my frustrations, with working in some countries is that there can be a cultural insensitivity, so that the individual comes into the country and says, we know the way, we don't know the way. We may have a solution, but we need to work interactively with the organization or the individual in order to make things happen. So there needs to be that cultural sensitivity. So too in the psychologist relationship with their client, that there needs to be that interaction. You want it to be empowering. Psychologist brings a unique constellation of skills and qualities to the relationship, but so too does the client. And yes, you can see extraordinary outcomes. But a good psychologist, it's not just about the task, what needs to be done, it's about the relationship and building that relationship and ensuring that the chemistry is right, so that you can get these great outcomes, whether it's achieving a podium finish as an athlete, or whether it's about integrating somebody back into the community or building resilience or leadership capability.
As I understood you correctly, you plan to build this chemistry with the local Ukrainian community by cooperating or collaborating with the leaders of this community, with a network of leaders. Yes.
Yeah. So I think you've got two approaches that you can have. One is that I can come in here and I can work directly with Ukrainians. That's one approach. The approach that I prefer to use, because we're talking about large-scale change here, is to engage people on the ground. And that means Ukrainians. Ukrainians have a better understanding of the challenges that they face than I do. They live this reality. Yes. They're having to live with air raid warnings. They've got the risk of mobilization. There's, as we saw, daily power cuts. So for me, it's very important to engage with locals, and to give them the knowledge and the skills that they can then subsequently apply with members of their community.
Like pyramid, yeah?
Yeah, and that way we'll have meaningful change, but on a larger scale. If it's just me working with one individual, okay, so we have 1, 2, 3, a handful of people that we can reach. And we can achieve good outcomes, but I think we'll achieve greater outcomes if we engage with, local Ukrainians, in the case of the coaching workshop, who have their own networks, who bring, again, that constellation of skills and qualities that can be activated to build that relationship with the people within their network, and to create those outcomes, one of which being building that leadership capability.
We can use media in this case. After the full-scale invasion, Ukrainian government decided to unite all of TV channels in one TV marathon, 24/7.
Yeah.
And this marathon can be the platform for the spreading of this product.
Yeah. To go into these communities and work, with these communities is difficult because you're talking about a combat area. The risk is high. How do they reach them? Okay, they can reach them remotely, but again, that implies that they've got access to telephones or computer and so on to use video conferencing platforms. But you do have the media, and what the media can do is that they can broadcast programs. There are initiatives that they can promote. They can highlight the success stories. One of my concerns is that too often, I don't know in Ukraine, but too often at home in Australia, I see news, and it's not good news stories.
Yes.
It's bad news stories.
Exactly.
It's like they actively filter. They've got all of this, these stories that they could present, and what do? It's like they cherry pick the bad ones, and what that means is it can create a false perception in the minds of the viewers. So the media has a role. They can promote the initiatives. They can draw attention to what is working, not just what is not working. They can have a role in educating people about the value of these programs, destigmatizing the work of psychologists and others who are going into these communities. So I see the media as playing a very important role, and that's Oleg. That's your role as well. You're part of this apparatus.
This is celebrating the moment before we establish our next end goal.
You are now ready for living, yeah? As I understood?
I leave today, this afternoon, yeah.
Yes. And when you plan to come back?
I would like to be back in November, December. I have commitments in the States and also in Australia. But November and December, I would like to come back to Kyiv, because I think having that physical presence on the ground is very important. We'll check in, we'll have another workshop, and we'll build on that foundation that we have already created. So a long answer to your question, but November, December is the short answer. Last question.
Yeah, last question.
Okay.
In the final, yeah.
It's a good one.
Yeah.
And it's not about kangaroos. I didn't expect you to talk about that experience, and that's something that I
Okay,
shared with
wallaby.
you earlier.
Wallaby
Kangaroo. Let's call it a kangaroo then. So with a kangaroo, the kangaroo, the Joey, was without a mother, and it was our responsibility to nurse that, Joey, to bring it back, to full health, and we had veterinary assistants and so on that helped that. But it came to live with us for a year. But the expectation was always that Joey would go back into the wild and join the mob.
In nature.
Yeah, in nature. And so too, I see my work here as being, okay, I'm here when I'm needed, but I'm going to disengage in the long term, because we're going to build the local resources. So the resources are there for you to manage it independently. And that's what we want to do. We want to empower. In psychology we talk about empowering the client, but now we're talking about empowering a society. We're talking about empowering communities and a country. And in time, I will peel away and leave it in the hands of very capable people such as yourself.
As a professional psychologist, you now made in a professional circle of interview. You connect the beginning with the end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But wallaby,
Yeah, it's a nice story. It's a nice story too. Thank you, Oleg. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.